That day, I was lying on a gurney in the hospital. In just a few minutes, they would wheel me into the operating room to remove one of my kidneys, to save my younger brother, the golden child spoiled by the entire family. My heart was pounding, and memories of my wife and son came rushing back. I had signed my own death warrant. Just as the nurse prepared to push the gurney, the door suddenly burst open. My 9-year-old son rushed in, clutching a stack of papers. His voice trembled but echoed through the room. "My dad won't donate his kidney. I have the truth that this family has been hiding for too long." "Hello, my name is Sawyer Reynolds. I'm 36 years old, living in New Orleans, Louisiana, where the scent of old alleyways blends with the faint sound of saxophones drifting from the bars on Bourbon Street. I'm a chef, working at a small but cozy restaurant in the French Quarter, where diners come not just to eat, but to soak in the soul of this city. My life, how should I put it, is simple but far from easy. I'm a single father, raising my 9-year-old son, Liam, ever since my wife, Rachel, passed away in an accident 6 years ago. Every day I try to keep our lives running smoothly, though sometimes it feels like walking on a tightrope, where a strong gust could send us tumbling. Our little house sits in a quiet neighborhood far from the hustle and bustle of the city center. It's where Liam and I have built our own little world. Every morning I wake up early, brew coffee, and make breakfast for Liam, usually peanut butter toast, his absolute favorite. I drop him off at school, watching him race through the gate with his oversized backpack, a bright smile on his face. Liam is my light, the reason I get up every day, even when I'm exhausted. He's smart, hardworking, and has a heart bigger than his small frame. I often wonder if I'm good enough to be the father of such an incredible kid. But life isn't just about me and Liam. My extended family, whom I love but who also give me headaches, is an inseparable part of it. My father, Vernon, and my mother, Loretta, live not far from us. They're the kind of people you want to be close to, but also keep at a distance. And then there's Mason, my younger brother, 2 years my junior, the family's prized jewel. Mason is a DJ working in nightclubs. He lives a life I can only describe in 2 words: reckless abandon. Since childhood, Mason has been pampered by our parents, always the center of attention. While I quietly fulfilled my duties as the older brother, Mason grew up with parties, alcohol, and worse things I don't even want to think about. I don't blame Mason for how he lives. Everyone has their own path, but what breaks my heart is our parents' favoritism. From a young age, I was used to being overshadowed by Mason's spotlight. I excelled in school, but my parents only praised Mason when he brought home average grades. My birthdays were celebrated with a small cake from the nearby bakery, while Mason got new bikes, basketballs, or whatever he wanted. I'm not jealous, honestly, but those small wounds over time have piled up into a mountain in my heart. 6 years ago, when Rachel passed away, my world collapsed. She was a strong woman who always knew how to pull me out of dark days. The accident happened on a rainy afternoon while she was on her way to pick Liam up from kindergarten. A truck lost control, and in an instant, I lost my life partner. Since then, I've learned to live for Liam. I work hard, saving every penny to ensure he has a stable life. The restaurant where I work isn't fancy, but it's enough to provide for Liam and keep a roof over our heads. I love my job, standing in the kitchen, chopping onions, sautéing shrimp with garlic, and hearing the laughter of diners through the wall. It's where I find a fleeting sense of peace. But then one day, everything changed. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was preparing my signature gumbo for the restaurant's guests. My phone rang, and my mother, Loretta's voice came through, trembling but forceful. "Sawyer, you need to come home now. It's about Mason." I frowned, a sinking feeling in my stomach. What trouble had Mason gotten into this time? The last time, he got drunk and crashed his car into a pole, leaving my parents scrambling to pay off his debts. I sighed, wiped my hands on my apron, took an early leave, and drove to my parents' house. When I stepped into the living room, the air felt heavy, like a storm about to break. My father, Vernon, sat silently in his armchair, his eyes sunken, avoiding mine. My mother, Loretta, stood in the middle of the room, hands on her hips, her gaze piercing through me. Mason was on the sofa, looking frailer than usual, his face pale, his hands trembling as he clutched a glass of water. "What's going on, Mom?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. My mother didn't beat around the bush. "Mason has kidney failure. He needs a transplant urgently. You need to help your brother. Get tested to see if your kidney is compatible and donate one to him." I froze, as if someone had punched me in the chest. My brother had kidney failure, and I was supposed to give him one of my kidneys? My parents didn't give me time to process. The next day, we were at the hospital for tests. That afternoon, the doctor delivered the results. My kidney was a perfect match. My mother turned to me, her voice resolute, as if issuing a command. "There's no other option. You have to donate your kidney to Mason. If you don't, your brother will die." I stood there, stunned and choking, feeling like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. The floor beneath me felt like it was crumbling. I'm not a selfish person, but my mother's words cut like a sharp blade. I thought of Liam, my 9-year-old son waiting for me at home, with his dreams, his smiles, and his fears of losing his father. If I donated my kidney, my health would decline. I'd read somewhere that kidney donors can live normally, but not always. There are risks, days of fatigue, and the possibility I wouldn't be able to work as hard as before. Who would take care of Liam if I wasn't strong enough? Who would drive him to school or tell him bedtime stories? But then I looked at Mason, my brother, who, despite his many mistakes, was still my flesh and blood. He sat there, looking small and weak, no longer the arrogant DJ of late-night parties. How could I refuse when my mother looked at me with pleading eyes, as if Mason's life depended entirely on me? "I need time to think," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. My mother frowned, her tone icy. "Time? Sawyer, don't you understand? We don't have time for you to think. Your brother is dying. If you don't help, we'll never forgive you." Her words were like a death sentence hanging over my head, suffocating me. My father, Vernon, just looked at me with sad eyes but said nothing. His silence was more terrifying than my mother's demands. I left the hospital and drove home in a daze. That night, I sat in the living room staring at a photo of my little family with Rachel on the wall. She smiled, her eyes bright as if telling me everything would be okay. But this time I wasn't sure. I thought of Liam, the years he needed me most. I thought of Mason, his reckless life, and all the times I'd cleaned up his messes. I thought of my parents, how they always put Mason above me as if I existed only to serve my brother. I stood up, opened Liam's bedroom door, and watched him sleep peacefully. He was curled up in his blanket, his face serene like an angel. I sat by his bed, gently stroking his hair. "What should I do, son?" I whispered, knowing he couldn't hear me. My heart felt torn in two. One side bound by duty to my family, my brother, and my mother's words about blood ties. The other side filled with love for Liam and our future together. I didn't want to be selfish, but I also didn't want to risk my health, leaving Liam with a father who was constantly weak. In the days that followed, the pressure from my family grew heavier. My mother called constantly, her voice alternating between pleading and threatening. "Sawyer, you're the older brother. You have to save him. It's your duty," she said, her voice trembling but forceful. My father, as usual, said little, but each time we met, his eyes seemed to say I had no other choice. Mason texted me, short but emotional messages. "Bro, I know I'm not perfect, but I don't want to die. Please." The pressure from my parents and the pleading words from my brother brought back memories of the summer when I was 17. Back then, I worked part-time at a sandwich shop near our house, washing dishes for hours under the sweltering heat of New Orleans. I saved every penny, dreaming of buying a computer for college, chasing my ambition to become an architect. I had planned meticulously, even jotting down every expense in a small notebook. But one day, my father called me into the room, his voice stern. "Son, Mason needs money to start a small business project. Give him the money you've saved." I was stunned, feeling as if the blood in my veins had stopped flowing. "But that's the money I saved for college," I stammered. My mother cut in, her voice cold. "You're the older brother, Sawyer. An older brother is born to help his younger sibling. That's your duty." And so I handed over the money to Mason, though it felt like my heart was being crushed. He took it with a wide grin, promising to pay me back when he made it big. But I knew, and my parents knew too, that Mason would never repay me. The money disappeared into parties, expensive clothes, and things I didn't even want to think about. I went back to work, but this time I no longer dreamed of a computer or college. I worked just to get through the days, to forget the feeling that a part of my future had been taken from me. Throughout my childhood, I learned to live with the role of the brother who must sacrifice. I didn't protest or argue, though each time I gave in, I felt like I was losing a piece of myself. The words my mother said when I was 17 still echo in my mind to this day like a curse. An older brother is born to protect his younger sibling. That's a lifelong duty. Now, sitting in a dimly lit room with the weight of donating a kidney to Mason pressing down on me, I felt trapped in a whirlwind with no way out. Every night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to find an answer. But the answer never came. There were only questions, fears, and a growing sense of helplessness swelling in my heart. I knew that sooner or later I would have to make a decision. And that decision, whatever it was, would change my life forever. One morning, my mother called, her voice no longer pleading but almost commanding. "Sawyer, you need to be at the house this afternoon. The whole family is meeting. You're not allowed to be absent." I sighed, feeling like I was being dragged into a battle without any weapons. I dropped Liam off at school, watching him wave through the car window, his innocent smile like morning sunlight. Then I returned to the restaurant, trying to work as usual, but my mind was in turmoil. The sound of chopping knives and the familiar aroma of spices couldn't mask the heaviness in my heart. As the afternoon approached, I had no choice but to leave the kitchen and drive to my parents' house. My heart weighed down as if carrying an entire mountain. My parents' house sat at the end of a quiet street, an old wooden home with faded floral curtains. When I pushed the door open, the air in the living room was thick, like a storm cloud ready to burst. It wasn't just my parents there. The entire extended family was present. Aunts, uncles, cousins, even people I rarely saw. They filled the room, sitting on the sofa, dining chairs, and even makeshift plastic ones. Mason sat in a corner, looking frailer than before, his eyes shadowed with dark circles, his trembling hands clutching a glass of water. My father, Vernon, sat silently in his usual armchair, his gaze distant as if avoiding mine. My mother, Loretta, stood in the center of the room, her posture like a general preparing for battle. I felt like a defendant walking into a courtroom with every pair of eyes fixed on me, expectant, judgmental. "Sawyer, sit down," my mother said, her voice firm but trying to maintain a semblance of calm. I pulled up a chair and sat, feeling as if the room were shrinking, pressing against my chest. "We're here today because of Mason," she began, her voice clear and sharp. "My youngest son is fighting for his life. And Sawyer, you're the only one who can save him." She looked straight at me, her eyes boring into my soul. "Have you made up your mind? Are you going to let your brother die?" I opened my mouth to respond, but my throat felt constricted. I glanced around, seeing the eyes of my relatives, Aunt Marie, who always defended Mason, Uncle John, who rarely spoke but now nodded in agreement with my mother, and my cousins, their gazes a mix of curiosity and pressure. I felt like I was on trial, as if my hesitation made me a traitor. "Mom, I need more time," I said, my voice hoarse, almost pleading. "Time?" my mother nearly shouted, her voice breaking with anger and pain. "Mason doesn't have time. Don't you see him wasting away every day? You're his brother, the only compatible donor. If you refuse, you're no longer my son." I looked to my father, hoping he'd say something, anything, to ease the suffocating tension. But he just bowed his head, his hands clasped tightly, silent as a statue. Aunt Marie spoke up, her voice gentle but heavy with weight. "Sawyer, your brother has his whole life ahead of him. He's young, with so many dreams. You're the older brother. You have to protect him. That's what families do." Her words, though soft, poured fuel on the fire burning inside me. Mason, whom I barely recognized with his pale face and sunken eyes, suddenly stood up. He walked toward me, his trembling hands touching my shoulder. "Brother," his voice was weak, almost a whisper, "I know I haven't been a good brother. I've done a lot of wrong things, but you're my only hope. Please don't abandon me." His eyes glistened on the verge of tears, and in that moment I saw the little Mason from years ago. The boy who used to run after me in the yard, laughing gleefully as I pushed him on the swing. But then, I also remembered the times he was drunk, the times he squandered the family's money on meaningless things, the times he left me to clean up his messes alone. I wanted to say no, to stand up and walk out of that room, but the eyes of Mason, my mother, and the entire family formed an impenetrable wall, trapping me. I thought of Liam, his smile when I picked him up from school, the way he hugged me tightly every night before bed. I thought of Rachel, who once told me I had to live for our son, not for anyone else. But in front of me, the family was watching, waiting, as if I held the key to saving them all. I felt suffocated. Every word, every glance was like a blade twisting in my chest. I wanted to scream, to run away, but my feet felt nailed to the floor. And then, that moment came. Mason grabbed my hand, his voice trembling. "Brother, I'm begging you." I looked into his eyes, seeing desperation, but also the selfishness I'd grown accustomed to since childhood. I no longer had the strength to resist. I was too exhausted, too worn down by years of being pressured and demanded of. "All right," I said, my voice hoarse as if it came from someone else. "I'll donate my kidney to Mason." The room erupted. My mother burst into tears, rushing to hug me, whispering, "Thank you, Sawyer. You're the family's hero." Aunt Marie patted my shoulder, Uncle John nodded in approval, and others began clapping as if I'd just accomplished a great feat. Mason bowed his head, muttering thanks, but something in his eyes still unsettled me. My father, Vernon, finally looked up, but his gaze wasn't one of joy. It was a deep sadness, as if he knew what I had just sacrificed. But in my heart, there was no joy, no relief, only a vast emptiness, as if I'd just given up a piece of my soul. I thought of Liam, of the days I might not have the strength to take him to school or play ball with him. I thought of the years I'd sacrificed, from the bike I never got to the buried dream of becoming an architect, and now, my own health. I knew this decision wasn't about family loyalty, but because I'd been backed into a corner with no way out. As I left my parents' house, I drove in silence, the radio off, with only the sound of the wind rushing through the window. I stopped in front of Liam's school, watching him run out, his backpack bouncing on his shoulders. "Dad," he called, his smile radiant like sunlight. I smiled back, but it was a heavy smile carrying a lifetime of sacrifices. I hugged Liam tightly, feeling his warmth, and in that moment I knew I had made a decision that might come at a steep cost for both of us. In the days that followed, I began preparing for the surgery. The doctor required me to undergo a series of tests, from blood work to CT scans, to ensure I was healthy enough to donate a kidney. Each time I stepped into the hospital, it felt like walking into a prison with the doors slowly closing behind me. I tried to stay calm in front of Liam, not wanting to worry him. Due to my busy schedule, I had no choice but to send Liam to stay with my parents for a few days. I didn't want to, honestly, but I had no other option. Every time I dropped him off there, it felt like I was entrusting a piece of my heart to someone else. My parents' house was the same as always, with the smell of stale coffee and the constant drone of the TV news. But this time, something felt off. A subtle unease creeping into my heart, though I couldn't pinpoint what it was. The first sign that something was wrong came when I went to pick up Liam one late afternoon. I walked into the living room and saw my father, Vernon, sitting in his armchair, holding a coffee mug but avoiding my gaze. Normally, he'd ask about my work or Liam, even if just for small talk. But this time, he only nodded and turned away as if hiding something. My mother, Loretta, on the other hand, was more irritable than usual. When I asked if Mason was following the doctor's dietary restrictions, she glared at me. "Mind your own business, Sawyer. Mason's already weak enough without you prying." Her voice was sharp, as if I'd just insulted the entire family. I frowned, trying to stay calm. "I'm just asking. I need to know to prepare for the surgery." She didn't respond, just turned away, muttering something about me always doubting my brother. I didn't want to argue or make things worse, so I stayed silent, took Liam's hand, and left. But as I stepped outside, I caught a strange smell, a faint mix of cigarette smoke and alcohol. I paused, looking around. Mason was on dialysis. How could he be smoking or drinking? The doctor had been clear that he needed to keep his body clean for the transplant. I told myself it was probably just the neighbors or my own oversensitivity. But a seed of doubt had been planted in my heart, small but steadily growing. In the days that followed, more unsettling signs appeared, like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't yet make sense of. One day, when I dropped off some things for Liam at my parents' house, I noticed an empty wine bottle in the trash bin outside. I stopped, looking closer. It was an expensive brand, the kind Mason used to boast was only for special occasions. I tried to reassure myself, maybe it was an old bottle or one left by a relative. But the unease didn't go away. I started noticing small details. The way Mason played the victim every time we met, his voice weak but his eyes cold and calculating, as if watching me. The way my father avoided my questions about Mason's condition, and the way my mother snapped whenever I asked anything, as if I were digging into a secret she didn't want me to uncover. One evening, as I sat with Liam in our living room, he suddenly spoke up. "Dad, I saw Uncle Mason smoking in the backyard at Grandma's yesterday." I froze, the knife I was using to peel an apple dropping onto the table. "Are you sure, Liam?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded, his big round eyes full of worry. "I saw him standing behind the oak tree, thinking I didn't notice. But I smelled cigarette smoke, like when you told me to stay away from smokers at the park." My blood ran hot. Mason smoking? While on dialysis, while the whole family was pinning their hopes on this transplant? I wanted to call my mother immediately to confront her, but I stopped myself. I didn't want to drag Liam into this mess. "All right," I said, ruffling his hair. "You probably got it wrong. Don't worry, I'll look into it." But inside, a storm of doubt was brewing. I began to wonder, was Mason truly trying to survive, or was he just exploiting the family's love, exploiting me? That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room staring at Rachel's photo on the wall. She smiled, as if urging me to stay sharp, to protect Liam and myself. I thought about all the times Mason promised to change. The times he cried and apologized after causing trouble, only to fall back into his old ways. I thought about my parents, how they always covered for him no matter how many mistakes he made. I wanted to believe I was being overly sensitive, that it was all in my head. But those signs, the cigarette smoke, the wine bottle, my father's evasive looks, my mother's sharp tone, clung to me like shadows that wouldn't leave. I knew I needed answers, but I was afraid of what I might find. If Mason wasn't truly valuing this chance, if my parents were hiding something from me, then my decision to donate a kidney wouldn't just be a sacrifice. It would be a mistake that could destroy Liam's and my future. I hugged Rachel's photo, whispering, "What should I do? I don't want to lose any more, but I don't want to be selfish either." There was no answer, only the cold, lonely sound of the wind whistling through the window. I knew the surgery was approaching, and I had to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The final days before the surgery passed like a hazy dream, both slow and rushed, as if time were playing tricks on me. I tried to keep life normal for myself and Liam, but every step I took felt heavy, as if I were carrying a lifetime of sacrifices. My family, especially my mother, gave me no moment of peace. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from her, from Mason, and even from Aunt Marie, each one like an arrow piercing my heart. "Sawyer, tomorrow is a big day. Don't let the family down." My mother texted, her words as cold and sharp as a blade. Mason sent short, feeble messages. "Brother, I know I don't deserve it, but thank you for giving me a chance." I read them with a lump in my throat, unsure if it was pity or anger. I began seeking out familiar places, the little corners of New Orleans that Rachel and I used to love, as if they could provide answers. One chilly afternoon, I drove to the cemetery where Rachel rested. The sky was overcast, heavy clouds drifting slowly overhead. I brought a bouquet of white daisies, her favorite, and sat in front of her cold headstone. "I don't know what to do anymore, Rachel." I whispered, my voice hoarse, as if afraid to disturb her eternal sleep. "If I donate my kidney, what will happen to Liam? If I'm not healthy enough, who will take care of him? But if I refuse, the whole family will turn their backs on me. You told me to live for Liam, but now I'm being forced to live for someone else." I bowed my head, feeling hot tears roll down my cheeks, falling onto the damp grass. I remembered Rachel's funeral 6 years ago. The rain poured relentlessly. The cemetery was nearly empty, with only a few friends, colleagues, and Rachel's parents standing by my side. Liam, just 3 years old, clung tightly to me, his eyes wide with confusion, not understanding what was happening. My parents weren't there. They said my father had a high fever and Mason was busy preparing for a nightclub gig. I stood there alone, holding Liam in the freezing rain, feeling as if the entire world had abandoned me. That pain, the pain of being forsaken by my family in the most devastating moment of my life, remained as raw as ever, like a scar that never healed. And now, as I prepared to sacrifice a part of my body for Mason, I wondered, would they truly value it? Or was I just a tool to get what they wanted? When I returned home, I tried to spend every remaining moment with Liam. That night, I sat by his bedside, watching him sleep peacefully, his face serene, his lips curved in a faint smile as if dreaming of something joyful. I gently stroked his hair, feeling the warmth of his small body. "If I'm not strong enough anymore," I whispered, "who will take you to school? Who will tell you bedtime stories? You've already lost your mom. Will you now lose a healthy father too?" Questions I knew had no answers. I just sat there looking at my son, overwhelmed by a deep fear that I was trading his future for a duty I wasn't sure was right. I tried talking to my mother one last time, hoping she'd understand. I called her, my voice trembling. "Mom, I just want to be sure Mason will value this chance. I've seen signs. The wine bottle, the smell of cigarettes. I need to know the truth." But she cut me off, her voice sharp as a blade. "Sawyer, how dare you doubt your brother at a time like this? Mason is so weak, can't you see? You're only thinking about yourself." I fell silent, feeling as if I'd been slapped. I wanted to say something, but in the end, I quietly hung up, sank into a chair, and let the wave of helplessness engulf me. The day of the surgery drew near, with only a few hours left before I would lie on the operating table. I went through the motions like a machine, signing papers, meeting with the doctor, answering questions about my health. But inside, I stood on the edge of a cliff, one step away from falling. On one side was the pressure from my family. My mother's words about blood ties, Mason's weak gaze, my father's terrifying silence. On the other was Liam, my responsibility as a father, my promise to Rachel to always protect our son. I felt torn in two, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find a way out. Early in the morning, I stepped into the hospital, the cold white lights illuminating the endless hallway. I wore a patient gown, the thin fabric brushing against my skin like a reminder that I was about to sacrifice a part of my body. My heart pounded, not from fear of pain, but from the dread of losing myself, of losing my ability to be a father to Liam. My family was there in full force. My mother, Loretta, pacing back and forth, directing everyone like a director on a film set. My father, Vernon, sitting silently in a corner, hands clasped tightly, his gaze distant. Mason lying in a nearby bed playing the role of a frail patient, repeatedly grasping my hand and calling me big brother in a trembling voice. A few relatives were also present, their eyes fixed on me, both expectant and commanding. I tried to stay calm, but with every passing minute the pressure weighed heavier on my shoulders. My mother approached, placing a hand on my shoulder, her voice soft but sharp as a blade. "Sawyer, you're the hope of this entire family. Don't let me down." I wanted to say something, but my throat was tight, unable to utter a word, so I just nodded. The night before, I had held Liam as he slept in our little house, feeling his warmth as a way to keep myself grounded before this fateful day. That morning, I had planned to bring Liam with me, but my mother called, her voice firm. "Sawyer, today is a big day. Drop Liam off at our house to be safe. You don't want him seeing you on the operating table, do you? Aunt Marie will watch him." I hesitated, not wanting to be apart from Liam, but my mother's pressure left me no room to argue. I took Liam to my parents' house before heading to the hospital, telling him to call me if anything happened. Liam looked at me, his big round eyes full of worry, whispering, "Dad, I want to stay with you." I ruffled his hair, promising I'd be back soon, but my heart was heavy as if carrying an entire mountain. I had no idea that my son would soon change everything. In the hospital waiting room, as the nurse brought me to sign the final paperwork, my hands trembled. The pen felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, each stroke bringing me closer to the operating table. My mother stood beside me, her voice like a judgment. "Sign it, Sawyer. This is the right thing to do." My father looked at me, his eyes sad but silent. I held the pen ready to sign, but images of Liam flooded my mind. His smile, the way he ran into my arms after school, his laughter ringing out when we played ball in the backyard. I thought of Rachel, of the promise I'd made to her to always protect Liam. My hand shook, the pen hovering over the paper. "I need a minute," I said, my voice hoarse, almost pleading. My mother frowned, her tone sharp. "A minute? Sawyer, what are you hesitating for? Your brother is waiting." My father shifted as if about to say something, but then fell silent again, his eyes filled with regret, as if he were battling himself. I bowed my head, feeling as if the entire world was pressing me into a dark corner with no escape. And then, in that heavy silence, I signed. The pen scratched across the paper, sounding like my heart being torn apart. Immediately after, the nurse stepped in, collected the paperwork, and said gently, "Please follow me. We'll prepare to take you to the operating room." I stood, my legs heavy as lead, walking without feeling anything anymore. Then I returned to the preparation room, lying down on the gurney as the nurse instructed, letting them wheel me toward the operating room. At that moment, a small cry echoed from the end of the hallway. "Dad!" I jerked my head up, my heart pounding. There was Liam, my son, standing there, panting, his face flushed from running. In his hands was a stack of crumpled papers, clutched tightly as if he'd held them the entire way. The whole family froze. My mother glared, her voice icy. "What is that boy doing here? He's supposed to be at home with Marie." But Liam ignored her. He rushed forward, standing in front of my gurney, his eyes red but resolute, like a tiny warrior. "Dad, you can't donate your kidney. They've been hiding the truth from us for too long." I was stunned, unable to comprehend what was happening. "Liam, what are you talking about? Why are you here?" I asked, my voice trembling. He took a deep breath, as if summoning all his courage. "I snuck out of Grandma and Grandpa's house. I had to come here, but because I can't let you do this." I was overwhelmed with both pride and choking worry. Liam, only 9 years old, had made his way through the streets of New Orleans to the hospital just to protect me. "Liam, but what's going on? Why did you sneak out?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. He clutched the papers tightly, his voice shaky but clear. "This morning, when you dropped me off at Grandma and Grandpa's, I was bored because Aunt Marie was busy talking on the phone. I went to Grandpa's room looking for the old comic books he used to read to me. I accidentally knocked over a wooden box on the shelf. When I picked it up, I found these papers inside. I was curious, so I read them, and I saw I saw that Grandpa donated a kidney to Uncle Mason 6 years ago on the same day Mom died. Liam's voice broke, filled with anger and pain. The day Mom died, you stood alone in the rain handling her funeral while Grandpa was in surgery saving Uncle Mason. They abandoned you, abandoned Mom and me to protect someone who never changes. The room was shaken. I felt the blood in my veins freeze, as if the entire world had collapsed beneath my feet. My suspicions, the cigarette smoke, the wine bottle, my father's evasive glances, now formed a clear picture. I looked at my father. "Dad," I said, my voice choking, "you donated a kidney to Mason and you never told me. You abandoned me the day Rachel died to save him, and now you sit here letting Mom pressure me to do the same?" My father looked up, his eyes brimming with regret. "Sawyer, He whispered, his voice breaking, but he couldn't finish his sentence. For the first time, I saw him frail, like a man crushed by his past. My mother, Loretta, screamed, her voice cracking with panic. "That boy is lying. He doesn't understand adult matters. Don't believe a child." But Liam didn't stop. He pointed at Mason, his voice trembling but resolute. "I saw Uncle Mason smoking in the backyard at Grandma's. I saw him sneaking drinks at night. I heard him on the phone laughing with his friends, saying the doctors just exaggerate. He doesn't value the kidney Grandpa gave him. If you donate yours, he'll ruin it all again and I'll lose you." I looked at Mason, his face pale, his eyes panicked. "Liam, you're lying," he shouted, but his voice wavered as if trying to hide something. I took the papers from Liam's hands, flipping through them. The dates, the doctor's signature, and my father's name, Vernon Reynolds, were clearly recorded in the transplant records from 6 years ago. It all aligned with the day Rachel died, the day I stood alone in the cemetery holding Liam in the freezing rain. The truth was like a knife, cutting deep into my heart, shattering every shred of trust I'd tried to hold on to. "Is Liam right?" I asked, my voice hoarse, staring straight at my mother. She stepped back, her eyes wild, but she still tried to defend herself. "Sawyer, don't listen to that boy. He doesn't understand." But I wasn't listening anymore. I turned to my father, my voice trembling with anger and pain. "Dad, why didn't you tell me? You let me believe this was Mason's only chance when you'd already sacrificed. Why didn't you say anything? And now you want me to do what? Sacrifice again when Mason hasn't changed?" My father broke down, his shoulders shaking, tears streaming down his face, the first time I'd ever seen him cry in front of me. "Sawyer, I'm sorry," he said, his voice choked. But his apology couldn't soothe the pain erupting inside me. I looked at Mason, who bowed his head, unable to meet my eyes. And I looked at Liam, my son, standing there with red eyes but steadfast, like a little hero who had saved me from a terrible mistake. I braced myself, sat up from the gurney, my voice hoarse but resolute. "I'm not donating my kidney anymore." The room fell deathly silent, as if no one could believe their ears. My mother screamed, rushing to grab my hand. "Sawyer, you can't do this. Mason will die." But I pushed her hand away, and for the first time in my life, I felt strong enough to stand up to her. "Enough, Mom," I said, my voice cold as ice. My voice echoed in the hospital room, hoarse but unwavering, like a final declaration. Liam rushed into my arms, hugging me tightly, his tears soaking my shirt. The relatives around us murmured, some looking at my mother and Mason with disappointment. My mother, Loretta, kept screaming, calling me a traitor, but I no longer cared. My father, Vernon, sat motionless, his head bowed low, tears silently falling, as if he had just lost everything. The atmosphere in the hospital room after Liam exposed the truth erupted like a storm. The initial whispers among the relatives quickly turned into harsh murmurs. "So that's how it is," Uncle John, the quietest in the family, muttered, his gaze shifting from my mother to Mason, filled with disappointment. "I can't believe you hid this for all these years." Aunt Amanda stood up abruptly, pointing at my mother, her voice as sharp as a blade. "Loretta, you pressured Sawyer to sacrifice when Mason had already been saved once? Do you even have any humanity left?" Her words were like a punch, causing my mother to step back, her face pale, though she still tried to scream in defense. How dare you say that? My mother shouted, her voice breaking with panic. I just want to save my son. That's a mother's love, don't you understand? But the more she justified herself, the more she was seen as blind and selfish. Aunt Amanda shook her head, her voice cold. Loretta, you don't love Mason. You're just trying to preserve this perfect image of him in your head, no matter the cost. You forced Sawyer to sacrifice his whole life, and now you want to take his very existence. You're the one tearing this family apart. Her words cut like a blade, leaving my mother frozen, her eyes wild with confusion. Mason, his face pale, tried to stand and protest. You don't understand. I don't want to die, he said weakly, his voice laced with resentment. Then he turned to Liam, pointing and yelling, You lying little brat, you're ruining my life. His aggressive outburst only deepened the family's contempt. Uncle John stepped forward, looking straight at Mason, his voice low but sharp as a knife. You ruined the kidney your father gave you, and now you want to take one from your brother? You're a disgrace to this family. Mason shrank back, unable to respond, his eyes frantic as if he knew he'd lost the last of the family's support. My father, Vernon, remained seated, motionless like a shadow in the corner of the room. His gaze avoided everyone, his face etched with regret. My cousin Roy approached him, sighing. Vernon, you've sacrificed your whole life for Mason, from your kidney to every time you covered for him. And what did you get? A son who destroys everything and another son you abandoned. His words were like a dagger piercing my father's heart. He clutched his head, sobbing aloud. I just wanted to keep this family together, he whispered, his voice broken. But I was wrong. I was wrong to Sawyer. His regret, though belated, couldn't erase the wounds Liam and I had endured. Amid the chaos, I held Liam's hand tightly, taking one last look around the room. My mother was still screaming, trying to pull me back with threats. Sawyer, you'll regret this. You can't abandon your brother. But I was done listening. Mason, his face twisted with anger, continued to curse at Liam, calling him a meddling little brat. The relatives, one by one, began turning their backs on my mother and Mason, their gazes no longer filled with expectation but with profound disappointment. I took a deep breath, my voice calm but icy, as if I were finally taking control of my life for the first time. I've lost too much because of this family's favoritism and lies, I said, looking directly at my mother, at Mason, and at my father, who was still crying silently. From now on, I won't let my son grow up in this toxic cycle anymore. I took Liam's hand and led him out of the room. My mother's screams, Mason's curses, and my father's regretful silence faded behind us. I didn't look back, not even once. We stepped out of the hospital doors, the morning sunlight streaming down, warm but unable to dispel the chill in my heart. I looked down at Liam, seeing courage and a maturity beyond his years shining in his eyes. He pursed his lips as if afraid I'd scold him for turning everything upside down. But I knelt down, hugged him tightly, and whispered, Liam, you gave me a strength I've never had in my entire life. You didn't just save me from a mistake. You saved me from a lifetime of being forced. Liam squeezed my hand, a small smile breaking through, though his eyes were still red. I just didn't want to lose you, Dad, he said, his voice trembling. I hugged him tightly, feeling his warmth, as if it were the only thing keeping me grounded. I knew that behind those hospital doors my family was crumbling in chaos. My mother, blinded by her obsession, would never admit her wrongs. Mason, with his selfish nature, would continue to resent Liam and me. And my father, with his belated regret, would have to live with what he had done and what he hadn't done. In the weeks following that fateful day, I cut off all contact with my mother and Mason. My phone was flooded with messages from my mother, ranging from pleas to threats, but I didn't respond. I no longer had the strength to listen to her demands or accusations. Mason sent a few short, resentful texts. You abandoned me, Sawyer. You'll regret this. I read them with an empty heart, feeling no guilt anymore. I had spent my entire life sacrificing for him, only to realize that Mason never valued it. Now I just wanted to focus on Liam, on the days we could truly live. As I expected, Mason quickly spiraled downward. News about him reached me through relatives, who no longer hid their contempt for him. After that day in the hospital, Mason became an outcast. His friends, who used to party and drink with him, drifted away when they learned he was no longer the family's golden child. Business partners who once collaborated with him on DJ projects cut ties upon hearing about his reckless lifestyle. Mason's health deteriorated further, not just from kidney failure, but from his inability to abandon old habits. I heard he was still sneaking cigarettes and alcohol despite the doctor's warnings. Once, Uncle John told me that Mason had been kicked out of a nightclub for causing a scene while drunk, and he was left sitting alone in a corner muttering complaints about Liam and me. He blames everyone but himself. Uncle John sighed. I just nodded, saying nothing. My mother, Loretta, didn't escape the consequences of her blindness either. Her reputation within the family and community crumbled like a sandcastle. Relatives who once feared her now turned their backs, openly calling her domineering and foolishly biased. Aunt Amanda, who had confronted her in the hospital, stopped visiting. Uncle John, who had once stayed silent, now openly told others that she had destroyed the family with her blind protection of Mason. My mother's longtime friends, who used to play cards or sip coffee with her, gradually distanced themselves. I heard she became an old, bitter woman, living in resentment, with only Mason clinging to her like a shadow. Yet even with Mason, she remained stubborn, convinced that I was the traitor who ruined her youngest son's life. I didn't try to explain or change her mind. I was exhausted from those endless battles. My father, Vernon, was the only one who tried to mend things. His regret after that day in the hospital seemed to have changed him. One evening, a few weeks after the incident, he appeared unexpectedly at my doorstep. I opened the door to see him standing there, his face aged, his eyes sunken as if carrying a lifetime of mistakes. "Sawyer," he said, his voice hoarse, "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I gave a kidney to Mason, but what I lost even more was the bond between us. I don't want to keep making mistakes." I stood there, unsure how to respond. Liam, standing behind me, looked at his grandfather warily, but I saw in his eyes a glimmer of willingness to give him a chance. I invited my father inside, but the air between us remained heavy. He sat on the sofa, hands clasped tightly, recounting the years he tried to hold the family together, only to realize he had abandoned me, especially on the day Rachel died. "I thought saving Mason was the way to protect the family," he said, his voice trembling. "But I was wrong. I left you alone on the worst day of your life." I looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, but the wound in my heart was still there, unhealed. "Dad," I said, my voice low but clear, "I don't want to hold a grudge anymore. But I need time, and I need you to understand that from now on I'm living for Liam, not for anyone else." Liam stepped forward, holding my hand, his eyes looking at his grandfather with a mix of curiosity and caution. "Grandpa," he said, his voice small but firm, "I don't want Dad to be sad anymore." My father smiled, a sad smile, and nodded. "I promise, Liam," he said. "I'll try to be a better grandfather." It was the slow beginning of a new relationship between my father, me, and Liam. It wasn't easy or perfect, but for the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could rediscover some semblance of family. Meanwhile, I heard that my mother and Mason grew increasingly isolated. Mason, with his failing health, lived in resentment and loneliness. My mother, though still trying to shield him, couldn't hide the truth that the family had turned away. I didn't take joy in hearing this, but I no longer felt heartbroken either. I had learned that family isn't a place where I'm forced to sacrifice endlessly. True family is where I'm loved and protected, and that's what I wanted to give Liam. That realization led me to make a monumental decision: to sell our little house in New Orleans, a place filled with both joy and sorrow, and move with Liam to a quiet small town, far from the noisy streets and my mother's relentless berating calls. The new town, with its tree-lined roads and simple wooden houses, felt like a breath of fresh air for both of us. No more demanding glares, no more coercive words. For the first time in my life, I felt unshackled, free to live for myself and my son. Our life in the new town wasn't lavish, but it was fulfilling. Every morning I drove Liam to school, watching him dash through the gate with his backpack bouncing on his shoulders, his smile radiant. "Dad, pick me up early this afternoon, okay?" Liam called out, his voice clear as a bell. I nodded, smiling, my heart lighter than ever before. In the evenings, we cooked together in our small kitchen, the sound of chopping vegetables mingling with Liam's laughter as I playfully pretended to spill a spoonful of soup. Those moments, though simple, were treasures I hadn't dared dream of during the years I was bound by my family's expectations. I found work at a local restaurant, not as fancy as the one in the French Quarter, but enough to keep Liam and me comfortable. Here, the customers were townsfolk who called me by name and shared stories of their daily lives. This job wasn't just a way to make a living. It was a place where I rediscovered joy, a joy unburdened by family expectations. My bond with Liam grew even stronger, especially after the day he stood up to protect me in the hospital. I still remember his resolute eyes, the way he clutched those papers and shouted to defend his father. Every night as I sat by his bedside, I hugged him and whispered, "You saved me, Liam. Not just my life, but my entire existence." He'd smile, a pure, meaningful smile. "I just didn't want to lose you like I lost Mom." He'd reply, his voice soft but certain. I began engaging with the new community, helping other single-parent families as a way to give back what life had given me. I volunteered at the community center, teaching kids how to bake bread or organizing small picnics. These activities not only helped me integrate, but also brought me joy in the little things: a child's smile, a thank you from a single mother, or an afternoon playing soccer with Liam and his friends. One peaceful afternoon, Liam and I sat on the porch of our new home, the sunset stretching across the distant grassy fields. A cool breeze carried the scent of dry grass and wildflowers. Liam leaned his head on my shoulder, his youthful eyes now shining with confidence and peace. "Dad, I like it here," he said, his voice clear. "No one makes you do things you don't want to here." I smiled, ruffling his hair. "You're right, Liam. This is our home, where we get to be ourselves." In that moment, I felt this was what I'd been waiting for my entire 36 years. A small, imperfect family, but truly a home. My father, Vernon, stayed in touch occasionally. He visited a few times, bringing the old comic books Liam loved. The distance between us remained, but I could see he was trying step by step to make amends for his mistakes. "Sawyer," he said during one visit, his voice low but sincere, "I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want to be part of your and Liam's lives." I nodded, making no promises, but I let him play with Liam, watching my son laugh and joke with his grandfather. I no longer received direct news from my mother or Mason, only hearing snippets through relatives that they remained isolated and bitter. I didn't hope for them to change or to understand what I'd been through. I only wished for Liam to grow up in a world where he didn't have to sacrifice for anyone, where he was loved and protected. Each day, as I watched Liam run and play in the yard, his laughter ringing out, I knew I had made the right choice. Liam, with his courage and love, had taught me that true family isn't about coercion, it's about finding peace. As the sunset faded, Liam and I sat there, watching the sky shift from vibrant gold to deep purple. I held his hand, feeling his small fingers grip mine tightly. "Dad," Liam said, his voice soft but confident, "we'll always be together, right?" I smiled, pulling him into my arms. "Always, son," I replied. And in that moment, I knew that no matter how painful the past had been, Liam and I had found a new future. A future where family meant love, protection, and the freedom to live true to ourselves.